The Democracy Forum brings you another not-to-be-missed webinar, Growing Afghan Refugee Crisis in Pakistan and Its Impact on the Pakistan State. The people of Afghanistan have long sought refuge in neighboring Pakistan, fleeing decades of conflict, poverty and state collapse. Today, following the Taliban's return to power in 2021, Pakistan is home to more than 3.7 million Afghan refugees. What has been the impact of this influx on Pakistan in terms of social cohesion, as well as national and economic security? How has the Pakistan state responded to the growing crisis? And how can the country's policymakers simultaneously meet humanitarian responsibilities and oversee challenges such as terrorist threats and border attacks? To discuss these and related issues, tune into our live debate, bringing your questions and comments for the panel.
Hello and welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley, your host for the next hour. This is a Democracy Forum debate where we drill down deeply on global issues of the day, often coming up with conclusions far apart from mainstream commentary and media. Growing Afghan refugee crisis in Pakistan and its impact on the Pakistan state. Now, Pakistan has long been caught in the turbulence of rival powers, long before it was even a nation, from the great game conflicts of the 19th century to the Soviet-Afghan invasion of the 20th century to collapse back to Taliban rule 4 years ago. The flood of refugees from that catastrophe is what we're talking about today, and already precarious in its domestic politics and its teetering economy. Could this challenge tip that long-ago vision of Pakistan as a beacon of the Islamic world over the edge? To debate this question, we have a sharp and knowledgeable panel: Pervez Hoodbhoy, Marvin G, Weinbaum, Leno O'Donnell. But as always, in our Democracy Forum debates, I will ask our president, Lord Charles Bruce, to give us the background canvas of our discussion. Lord Bruce, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Humphrey. Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, which has been called to draw attention to the humanitarian emergency developing in Pakistan concerning the fate of over 900,000 Afghan refugees. I'm particularly grateful to the team at TDF for arranging this event at such short notice. But clearly, this is a crisis of immediate concern with serious consequences for the region. I'd like to thank all our participants for responding to our invitation to join the panel, which Humphrey Hawksley has kindly agreed to chair. President Trump's executive order, signed on the 20th of January, reevaluating and realigning United States foreign aid, has effectively shuttered United States Agency for International Development and slashed federal support overseas. The impact of this decision has become a grim reality for the Afghan refugee program in Pakistan, where around 3 million refugees have settled since the return of a Taliban-led government in Afghanistan in August 2021. United States funding has been the bedrock of the refugee program, providing over 40% of the $100 million received in international aid by Pakistan last year. But even this has fallen short of the funding target set by the United Nations at $368 million. Pakistan is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention and historically has managed its Afghan refugees through ad hoc arrangements. This month, the UNHCR agency in Pakistan revealed that the United States funding freeze would, I quote, severely impact the agency's operations, adding that the ability to respond in the event of an emergency is also being seriously challenged. And over the last 18 months, it is estimated that over 845,000 Afghans have already left. Pakistan confirms that 3 million remain. Of these, 1.34 million hold proof of registration cards, while over 800,000 have Afghan citizenship cards, ACC cards. And there are a further 1 million refugees with no paperwork at all. And within the last month, the Pakistan Interior Ministry has already warned the holders of the citizenship cards, along with others living in the country without official recognition, to leave voluntarily before introducing mandatory repatriations. Next next month, tomorrow. Those with proof of registration may remain until the 30th of June. There is no doubt that the refugee crisis is an existential issue which has come to define Pakistan's foreign relations with Afghanistan as fundamentally a crisis in cross-border security. According to the Islamabad-based Center for Research and Security Studies, terrorist attacks in Pakistan by militant groups based in Afghanistan last year claimed the lives of 2,500 people, over 60% increase since 2023. A United Nations Security Council report published in July last year estimates that as many as 6,000 TTP fighters operate out of Afghanistan. As Pakistan's former special representative in Kabul, Asif Durrani, explains, Pakistan is losing patience with the Taliban, I quote, which refuses to take action against the TTP. They've done nothing but act like ostriches with their heads in the sand when we show them proof that terrorism is emanating from their borders. And reflecting on the intractable nature of the problem, the former Pakistan ambassador to the United States and United Nations, Malia Lodi, suggests that following the withdrawal of United States and coalition forces in 2021, I quote, Islamabad made a strategic miscalculation by betting that the Taliban would turn on the TTP. But economic interdependence and religious and ethnic ties mean that neither side can afford a breakdown in relations. Well, thank you very much for deciding to watch our webinar today. And if you have any comments or questions, please comment.
Well, Charles Bruce, thank you very much for that. Ad hoc arrangements, cross-border security, the choice to leave voluntarily before introducing mandatory repatriation in April. That's going to happen in a few days' time or tomorrow, like Lord Bruce said. Our first panelist for this discussion is Marvin G. Weinbaum, Director of the Afghanistan and Pakistan Studies at the Middle East Institute. And he worked as a State Department analyst on those two countries from 1999 to 2003, straddling the pivotal events of 9/11. He's published books, written and edited dozens of articles. The Afghan refugee crisis and its impact on Pakistan. Marvin Weinbaum, tell us what you know.
Well, let me take a step backward here and set the stage for this discussion, in a sense, by talking about the refugees in Pakistan and realizing that there has been for some time now a crisis on the very presence of the Afghans in the country. What stands out for me is the multifaceted nature of Pakistan's refugee crisis and its uneven impact across the country. The crisis has economic, humanitarian, and security, as well as inter-ethnic partisan dimensions. Involved are roughly 3 million Afghans, more than half undocumented, most of whom tried in vain to gain documentation. Depending on the locale, they can either be well integrated and welcome where they are viewed, where elsewhere they are viewed as ungrateful, predatory interlopers. Seen negatively, Afghan refugees have created a severe strain on Pakistan's resources and services. They're being accused of being contributors to housing shortages, unemployment, rising crime rates, including narcotics and smuggling, black marketing, money laundering, and kidnapping. The refugee community, the greatest number of whom are settled in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan provinces and Karachi, are held responsible for exacerbating interprovincial Punjabi, Pashtun, Baloch economic and political tensions. Many blame the refugees for contributing to domestic radicalization and helping to fund terrorist organizations in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now, looking at the positive side of the ledger, the refugee community has made a strong contribution, economic contribution. It has brought about entrepreneurial drive to areas of Pakistan badly needing it. During my visits to Peshawar during the early 1970s, the city struck me as a backwater, a sleepy place. When I returned in the 1980s, following the communist takeover in Afghanistan, at one point, living there for over 7 months, the Afghans had transformed the city economically and socially. In Peshawar as elsewhere, Afghans have built trucking, transport industries, and played a major role in construction and small businesses. Furthermore, they've made a contribution to the medical profession and educational scene. My own experience here is that the Afghan students, and many of them are enrolled in Pakistani institutions, are often the best motivated and best performing students. The most immediate crisis is a humanitarian one, resulting from Pakistan's forced repatriation of longtime resident Afghans to the country in a country to which they have no connection, and they're wholly unprepared for them to absorb them. The armed conflict may be sharply down in Afghanistan, making a safer return for the refugees, but the overwhelming number have no residence to return to or prospects for employment. At least some face the possibility of persecution for past political and wartime affiliations. It's worth asking whether Pakistan's deportation policy could backfire, with unabsorbed refugees in Afghanistan becoming radicalized and recruited by terrorist organizations. Now, in winding up here, and again, this is just a kind of, I hope, a background to more specific issues that have already been raised. Of course, the refugee crisis here is not unique to Pakistan. Iran may have twice the number of Afghans as refugees, and they're threatened with deportation, as are the 600,000 or so in Turkey. But Pakistan, for religious, sectarian, linguistic, cultural reasons, is probably best suited for the integration of them. Finally, let me say that, as elsewhere, Pakistan and Pakistanis in Uganda in the 1970s comes first to mind. The expulsion of a refugee community can create both opportunities for the native population, but more often historically, it's remembered for bringing about great losses economically and culturally. And I should mention here that if time permits, there is an uncanny parallel between what's going on in the United States and its immigration crisis and what has been occurring in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Marvin Weinbaum, thank you very much for that. I was actually going to ask you exactly that question, but just could you encapsulate for us what the deportation policy involves? Just give us a couple of bullet points on it.
Are we talking about the American deportation?
No, the Pakistan one.
Well, I think some of the other participants in the panel are probably better positioned to talk about that, but my impression, at least, is that there has been a great deal of debate going on as to whether this should be pushed, whether it will have, in fact, the kind of impact on local communities, and so there's been a great deal of caution, but the political pressures now, particularly coming, as I see it, from the Punjab. And rather than KP or elsewhere, it's coming from the Punjab. And I believe that the Pakistani people are very, very have very, very mixed feelings about it.
Okay, and just to your previous point, does the government feel that it's got more of a wind behind it with this policy because of what is happening in the United States, where we're seeing as students picked up and put into vans and flown to this effort?
The contagion from the United States is considerable, not just in Pakistan and elsewhere, particularly among authoritarian leaders or governments, that they feel that they have now a license because the United States has provided one. And it could very well be here now that the current government in Pakistan, again, I think the other panels will be better at commenting on this. It may very well be that they feel that they have more freedom to act now because of the kind of expulsion that we're seeing of large numbers from the United States.
And I'd like to put a question to you from one of our audience, Nadeem Shah. In the light of Pakistan is seen to be always playing both sides. Nobody's quite sure what to trust in it in that sense for many years. Nadeem Shah says, is it not the responsibility of the global community to collaborate more with the Pakistan government to help provide support to Afghan refugees? What is the position of the global community?
Well, I believe that there will still be assistance here from European countries for the humanitarian efforts in Afghanistan. The United States, I personally feel, as do most of the people, not all of the people I know, that what we're doing in Afghanistan by withdrawing the assistance, but it's happening everywhere in Africa, elsewhere. Things we just could never imagine. We took for granted that the United States would always be there with the institutions that would matter so much in various areas, food, health, education, regardless of which regime or which government, I should say, in the United States was in power. But now we've had the rude awakening that no, you can't take even that for granted.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Please stay with us because more questions are coming in. We are now going to Dr. Pervez Hoodbhoy, who is in Pakistan, I believe, a nuclear physicist, commentator, and widely read author. His latest book is Pakistan: Origins, Identity, and Future. So with increasing condemnation of Pakistan and these shifting plates, as we've just heard, how should it handle this refugee crisis? And another question for me, why has it not learned better from past experience? Pervez Hoodbhoy, give us your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I think Professor Weinbaum very aptly summarized the situation. It seems to me that there is some visceral element involved over here in the expulsion of Afghan refugees. I say that knowing the situation here because the organization which I head, 2 of our employees are Afghan refugees. They fled after the Taliban takeover. One of them is a woman, the other is a musician. And they have been targeted, although it is completely obvious that any woman who is returned to Afghanistan will be denied basic privileges. And the other person knows that his children, his girl children, will not be able to go to school. And this is true for the many Afghan refugees present here in Islamabad. Now, why is this happening? I feel this is because the government's relationship with the Taliban has soured. It is the Pakistani military which put or helped put the Taliban in power in Kabul. And for years, the West had been protesting, had been saying that there is the Haqqani network, there is the Quetta Shura, there's the Peshawar Shura. all indications that the Pakistani state and the Pakistani military was aiding the Taliban in the hope that it would achieve strategic depth against India. Now, all that has fallen through because the TTP is attacking the Pakistani military. There are soldiers and policemen who are falling every day. And so there is a lot of anger here. So it's the expulsion of the Afghan refugees is seen as a way of punishing the Taliban. To my mind, that is absurd because the Taliban don't care about Afghan refugees here. And although they might make a political point on this, yet they have enough problems of their own. They're being attacked by ISIS. There's poverty, starvation within Afghanistan. And they couldn't care less about what happens to those who they force to flee. So this is a revenge action, as I see it, by the Pakistani military, by the Pakistani administration. Well, the government is not very independent of the military, and it does what it says. In terms of the consequences, I feel that this is going to further sour the feelings among Afghan people about Pakistan. They saw Pakistan as bringing on the Taliban and doing it for American dollars. Now that the Americans have no interest left in Afghanistan, Pakistan seems to have dropped its interest too. And so one sees a lot of bitterness among Afghans that they were used by the Pakistanis for the purpose of fighting the Soviets, and then they've been just dropped from it. Now, I actually see this, in terms of how the public over here feels, I'd say it's pretty indifferent. Because for one thing, yes, there are, the fact is that Afghans do take away jobs from local people. There are a fair number of them. And the sympathy over time has died out for them. So the government is not facing any kind of particular popular resistance from the people here in Pakistan in its policy of expelling the Afghan refugees. Although I must say that there are human rights groups and there are those who say, well, what happened to the idea of Pakistan, which was supposed to be a homeland for all Muslims of the subcontinent? And certainly it is true that Mr. Jinnah, when he went to campaign for Pakistan in the 1940s, he would address the Afghans and say that you are Muslims first and Pathans second. So that pan-Islamism has certainly is certainly not apparent anymore. I'd say one last thing before I end. The Afghans who have been expelled from Islamabad, actually, the last date is I think another 2 weeks from now. But most of them, I'm told, have already left. In fact, our employees have left. It is only, so these particular people were told that although you have valid documents, you have a visa, yet you may not stay in Islamabad. We want Islamabad cleansed. You can, if you like, you can go to Peshawar or you can go to Karachi. These are the two places where the refugees are likely to head for, because there's the possibility of employment over there. Other small places in Punjab, they would neither be welcome nor would they be able to find a community where they could be gainfully employed. So this is where the situation stands presently.
Pervez Hoodbhoy, thank you very much for that. Just a couple of points that I'd like to clarify there. This idea that, the Pakistan military was aiding the Taliban and then the Taliban didn't, that relationship fell apart. Go a little deeper into that. Is the Pakistan military getting it wrong yet again, as it were?
Well, it certainly got it right at the beginning as a money spinner. So if we go back to 1979, which is just when, so it was December when the Soviets walked into Afghanistan. Just a little while before that, General Zia-ul-Haq had been told by the Americans that we are not going to give you any aid. In fact, the US embassy had been burned down, and I think this was September of 1979, so things were as bad as they could be at that time. Then came the invasion, then came those bucketfuls of dollars dropped from the sky, and well, it was a windfall for the Zia-ul-Haq government.
So just to, so that
they were sorry.
As far as getting money goes, it's just been a success, and it was after 9/11 to a certain extent. But as far as realizing Jinnah's pan-Islamic society that you just talked about, it's been a failure.
Yes, and the TTP is in fact more Islamic than those who claim to be defending the ideological borders of Pakistan. They say that we want Pakistan to be a Sharia state. And well, the army also says it wants it to be a Sharia state, but they can't agree which is the right form of Sharia over here. And so that's the paradox that a state based upon religion faces.
The religion and one other question on sort of public opinion on this. You've got the Afghan refugee issue that we're discussing now, but earlier we've discussed Chinese involvement in Pakistan and how much there's resentment against that. On a balance, which two do you think takes priority in the public's mind?
I think this is look, the Chinese are resented not in this matter in terms of their relationship to the Taliban, but in terms of how the army has privileged them in Balochistan and also in Gilgit-Baltistan. So in Balochistan, and I happened to be there a while ago, there's massive Chinese presence in the sense that they have huge housing colonies over there, a massive one that you can see from the sky, in fact. And the locals are deprived of drinking water. No jobs have been created, and so there's a lot of resentment there.
Yes.
And in terms of what goes on in Gilgit-Baltistan, well, there's also resentment there because mining rights and the road building is entirely now in the hands of the Chinese. And
So in those societies, it seems that there's more resentment about the Chinese issue than there is about the Afghan refugee issue.
Certainly in Balochistan and in Gilgit-Baltistan, but in the frontier in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, I don't think the Chinese issue is a significant one there.
Okay. And can I ask you a final question for one of our audience? Prashant Kumar has said, what are the implications of this crisis for India in terms of increased security and humanitarian concerns along the border and India's engagement with Afghanistan?
Well, that's very interesting because the Indians really have very little ideological sympathy for the Taliban, and yet they see this as a way in which to make inroads. And there have been allegations by the Pakistani military that the TTP is being funded by India. Obviously, I cannot say whether that is correct or not, but certainly India wishes to keep engagement with the Taliban, not because it has those historical ties with Afghanistan as they claim, but as a way of putting pins and needles into the Pakistanis.
Okay. Thank you for that. Please stay with us because we're going to come back around the panel, but we're finally going to go to Leno O'Donnell, who once ran the Associated Press Bureau in Kabul and has reported widely from Afghanistan and the region. Two of her recent pieces were headlined "Al-Qaeda is back and thriving in Afghanistan," and "The Taliban want a piece of Afghanistan." Where does the Afghan
Pakistan
in Pakistan, yes.
Yep.
And Pakistan fit into that scenario? Lynne, tell us what.
Oh, hi, Humphrey. Thank you so much for having me on. I thought I might just start with some of the numbers, because today is the deadline, March the 31st, for Afghans to leave voluntarily from Pakistan and go back. So the plan is that of those who don't go back, this year Pakistan wants to expel 3 million Afghans from the country. So it's a huge humanitarian operation and crisis in the making. This began in October 2023, and just a couple more numbers, about 845, I'm reading from today's Afghanistan exiled media, about 845,000 Afghans have left Pakistan over the past 18 months. These are IMO, International Organization of Migration, IOM, figures. Pakistan says 3 million Afghans remain. 1.3 million of them have proof of registration. 807,000 plus have Afghan citizen cards. So it's a big operation. The idea now is that roundups, arrests and forced deportations are set to begin. This came out of a high-level Interior Ministry-led meeting last Friday. So I thought that I would just talk a little bit around. I'll probably repeat some of the things that Pervez and Marvin have already said, so please forgive me. But Pakistan is rejecting the Afghan refugees for several key reasons, including security concerns, economic pressures, and shifting geopolitical calculations, which have already been touched on, of course. Pakistan is accusing Afghan refugees of harbouring or assisting militants from the TTP, the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, which is also known as the Pakistani Taliban. It's a terrorist group that's escalated attacks on Pakistani security forces, especially in recent months. We've seen an awful lot of attacks and deaths of Pakistani soldiers and armed police. The TTP operates from Afghanistan, and Islamabad believes that the Taliban is providing them sanctuary. I don't think it's only Islamabad that believes that. And by expelling the Afghan refugees, Pakistan is applying pressure on the Taliban to take action against the TTP and curb cross-border militancy. Initially, as we've heard from the other panelists, Pakistan supported the Taliban return to power in August 2021, so nearly 4 years ago, expecting a friendly government. We heard about the strategic depth against India. However, relations have soured because the Taliban came in and said, okay, thanks, Gov, we're in power now and we're going to do it our way. And that has included a refusal to crack down on the TTP. So expelling Afghan refugees is a way for Pakistan to express its frustration and demonstrate its ability to make life difficult for the Taliban. As we've already heard also, Pakistan is facing a severe economic crisis with inflation and unemployment at record highs. Afghan refugees, many of them having lived in Pakistan for decades, and as Pervez said, really contributing, and Marvin as well, contributing to the economic activity and vibrancy of many places where they have lived. They're being scapegoated as a burden on resources and services. And I guess they're an easy scapegoat, aren't they, for a government that is I think it's fair we can say mismanaging the economy, most definitely. The expulsions are in part a populist move to appease domestic critics who blame Afghan migrants for economic hardship and crime. The United States and its allies have been pressuring Pakistan to take a firmer stance on terrorism, particularly regarding groups operating from Afghan territory. It should be said here that since the Taliban came back to power in August 2021, they have basically extended protection to about 24, getting on to 24 registered and known about terrorist and jihadist organizations. The United Nations Security Council's Analytics and Sanctions Committee writes about this twice a year. And if you keep an eye on these reports, you'll see that it's getting more and more serious. Yes, China has a very close relationship with the Taliban. It has done for decades. But one of the reasons that they are pouring money into, for instance, the mining and minerals sector, as well as surveillance, is that they want the Taliban to curtail the activities of the ETIM, which is an anti-China militant movement. We've also seen them very active in Syria, but the Taliban aren't and won't, and really, when it comes down to it, can't do that, because that would be a pretty volatile thing to do, to turn on their brothers who helped them win the war. Pakistan's government is concerned about the long-term integration of Afghan refugees, particularly the Pashtun population, which has historical ties to Afghanistan and nationalist movements within Pakistan. The Pashtun nationalists are really quite a large force, let's say, and with growing nationalist sentiment in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and in Baluchistan, Islamabad may see the large Afghan population as a political liability. We've seen, I went to Miran Shah, very close to the border of Afghanistan in Pakistan this time last year, and there is very much a war going on, being fought by the TTP, sponsored by notably the Haqqani network, offshoot of the Taliban, and it is an existential threat to the Pakistani state, if I may say that. Pakistan's expulsions of Afghan refugees might also be a negotiating tactic by pushing Afghans back into the Taliban's Afghanistan. Islamabad is forcing the Taliban to deal with a sudden humanitarian crisis. We've already heard that, that this is something that they're ill-equipped to deal with, and even if they could deal with it, they don't want to. This is the biggest drug cartel in the world, controlling the flow of 95% of the world's opium, certainly moving into methamphetamine in a big way. So there's no lack of money, it's just where that money is going, and it's certainly not going onto the Afghan budget to alleviate poverty and unemployment and hunger. So this could also serve as leverage in future negotiations, I guess Pakistan hopes, whether related to security, trade, or political influence in the region. So Pakistan's decision to expel Afghan refugees is driven by, in conclusion, a mix of security, economic, and political factors. The policy risks worsening humanitarian conditions, destabilizing Afghanistan further, and damaging Pakistan's international reputation. But Islamabad sees it as a necessary step to pressure the Taliban, manage domestic discontent, and reassert control over its own internal security. I have a couple of other points that I could make, but I think I'll stop there and we can move on.
Thank you, Lynne, very much. You can make the points possibly in the follow-up questions that we're doing. I'd just like to go back to that question that came in earlier about the global responsibility. It sounds a bit light asking it now, but it would be a question of a few years ago when the world was a different place. But is there such a thing as the international community now? Is UNHCR and other agencies in there? Are there processing places where an Afghan refugee can apply to go and live in Italy or the US or something like that from Pakistan? Or has all that collapsed?
I don't think that it's collapsed for third countries, but what has happened, as far as I know anecdotally from people that I speak to, is that with the Trump administration's new policy, anyone who was waiting with a visa or for a visa to go to in Pakistan as a refugee to go to the United States, that's all been cancelled. I don't think that has changed for other countries in Europe or elsewhere, but it certainly makes it more tenuous, as we were hearing before, that what America is doing under the new administration is giving license to other countries as well to close down their, or at least reduce the impact of their refugee programs. But I think it's also worth saying that Iran has been expelling Afghan refugees for years. I've been to the borders on the other side before the end of the war and the Taliban's return, and hundreds of Afghans are deported from Iran every day. I think that has probably stepped up since the collapse because people fled from Afghanistan into Iran, but that's nothing new.
So is it the similar figures in Iran and in Pakistan of refugee numbers?
Yeah, from memory, I don't have the figures right in front of me, but there are millions of Afghans living illegally in Iran.
Okay. And you talked about various sort of other factors in Afghanistan. The Chinese have had this relationship with the Taliban, the drug cartels, and the money that's coming in from that. And then you mentioned about Pakistan wanting leverage over the Taliban and using it as a negotiating toy. The Taliban aren't going to take any notice of that, are they? I think we've heard before. So what is Pakistan's motive for doing this?
Well, we also heard from the others, and I said that they are being scapegoated. Pakistan's government is not. I'm grappling for words to describe its economic incompetence. You know, it's constantly borrowing money from international organizations and China, Saudi Arabia to pay the interest on loans that it already has. It's close to economic collapse. And what you need in these cases is somebody to blame for your problems. Well, you, as a Pakistani, would have a job if we didn't have millions of Afghans here taking your jobs. But that's not even the case. Afghans are entrepreneurial in the places where they have large communities. They are they're business people. They set up their own, they're economically dynamic and inclusive. And so I'm seeing it as a scapegoating by a government that really has no control over running the country competently.
And before I let you go and open to the panel, you're extremely familiar with Afghanistan. You've been there before and after and everything like that. What are they going back to?
Well, they're going back to egregious levels of unemployment. We've heard hunger, brutality. Sending women back is really sending them back to imprisonment. Women are largely locked inside their homes. One of the most recent decrees issued by the Supreme Leader, Haibatullah Akhundzada, was that women can't stand by windows, and windows that overlook other buildings are being bricked up. So that's what women, and girls can't go to school after primary level. Also, men and boys are being educated in hatred of anybody who doesn't, us, anyone who's not signed up to the Taliban project. And so little boys come home and abuse their mothers and their sisters because that's what they're taught. Shut up, I don't want to hear your voice. I'm better than you. It's a really brutal And I think for most people who aren't a part of that society or have never come up against it, difficult to understand brutality. That's what people are being sent back to. But if you've been running a business in Peshawar or Quetta or something for 30 years, you were born there, you took over Dad's trading business, and you're going back to nothing. And Afghan people in Pakistan also report how they're not allowed to take their belongings, and that any money that they have is being extorted from them by police and border guards as they're crossing back into Afghanistan. So not only are they leaving the homes that they have known for a long time, many of them, they're going back with nothing to nothing. It's a really tough situation.
So good. Thank you for putting that in perspective for us. And I want to open up to the panel to get back really to answer the question of what is going to be the impact of this on the Pakistan state. At the same time, I'd like to put a couple of questions from the audience. Margaret Barry, is there a political reason why Afghan refugees are not being more protected by the Pakistan government? I think we've answered that, but let's hear more thoughts. Ritesh Nigam, could the situation faced by Afghan refugees in Pakistan lead to their further migration? Let's Marvin, if you could sort of pick up on the final thoughts, encapsulate that, and the impact on the Pakistan state.
Oh, that's really what I was trying to get at. That this is not just simply a matter of getting rid of Afghans who have been coming really ever since the Russian invasion in '79 in different ways. It's not just a matter of that. They have made an indelible mark here on Pakistan's society in certain areas of the country. And what will happen if they leave in large numbers? Well, yes, more opportunities perhaps for jobs on some, but they brought with them and developed a set of skills which can't be simply duplicated. And we've seen this in the way in which they have filled in vacuums here in the economy. And as I mentioned, particularly in the area of transport and construction, and this is really not easily duplicated. What I'm trying to say is that Pakistan, again, not every area of Pakistan the same way, will be adversely affected by the departure of the Afghans. It may make some people feel better, and it certainly plays into any xenophobic feelings that exist in the country. But they may regret it.
And you agree with Leno O'Donnell that to Margaret Barry's question, is there a political reason that it's a scapegoat?
Well, it could be. It's a scapegoat. It's a diversion of attention from the other problems that Pakistan faces right now. And that I wouldn't discount that at all. That create another crisis here to divert from what is the major crisis that the Pakistani state faces now, and that its inability economically to remain viable.
Thank you very much. I take that to Pervez Hoodbhoy, which actually corroborates, Pervez, I think, what you were arguing before, but we've heard from Marvin Weinbaum that transport and construction are going to be impacted adversely. What else is going to be impacted?
It's very hard to say because this is part of the undocumented economy. And yes, of course, there's the transport sector, which is particularly in Karachi, is largely Pashtun run. But whether these are Afghan refugees or not, it's hard to say. I think, and I'll come back to this, this is frustration. This is a visceral reaction on part of the government because it just doesn't know what to do about the TTP. So just to tell you a little story, a couple of weeks ago, I was invited by the police academy here in Islamabad. And they asked me to figure out what's the problem, why have things gone wrong, and how is it that we should fight the TTP? Well, I said, what's the reason? Why should you fight the TTP? They want two things. One is they don't recognize the Durand Line. They say that this was made by some old Englishman 100 and some years ago, and there's no reason for us to respect it. And then
what is the Durand Line? Could you explain that to our wider audience, the Durand Line?
Yeah.
Just explain what it is.
Okay. So I don't remember his first name, but Mr. Durand was tasked with separating Afghanistan from India at that time. And so what he did was he took a ruler and he drew straight lines that went all the way from the north down to the south. And if you see that line on a map today, it's all jagged. So what happened was that the Pathans lived on this side of the line and that side of the line. It didn't matter in those days. But because there was the great game being played between Russia and the occupying British, well, you did need some kind of a demarcation at that time. Now what has happened is that the Pakistani military says that line is to be taken very seriously, and they have started fencing off the border. So there's barbed wire over there, which the Taliban do not recognize and which they punch holes into with mortars and grenades and bombs. And that, of course, allows the TTP to infiltrate into Pakistan as well. Now, in terms of the TTP and the Taliban, the Taliban say that, no, we're not really helping them. This is the TTP within Pakistan, and this is your internal problem. And actually, there's a bit of truth in that, because Imran Khan, when he was prime minister, he gave sanctuary to the TTP, and he had always had a soft spot for them. And therefore, today they are there as per an agreement with the Pakistani government. So it's a complicated situation. And when the police officers ask me, you can see that there's confusion over there. Because really, why should the Durand Line be respected? And if Pakistan is to be a Sharia state, a religious state, an Islamic state, then, hey, what's wrong with what the TTP is demanding? After all, they want,
so
go back to the
just to sum it up a bit, we have from Marvin transport construction and sort of things on the economy. From you, this is an upping of the level of internal friction that's going to go on here of these various groups. Do you agree with Lynne that this is a scapegoat, that this whole policy is unnecessary and a scapegoat? Hello, Pervez?
Oh, is this for me?
Yes.
Oh, yes. I absolutely. Oh, I completely agree with Lynne that yes, it's frustration. Look, this government is, for one thing, it doesn't have a popular mandate. That's pretty obvious, the way the elections were manipulated. For another, it has a very serious problem from two sides now. There is the TTP and there is the Baloch resistance, which has, they recently hijacked a train, as you know, an entire train, and that really put the Punjab in a state of shock. I completely agree that the initiative for for expelling the Afghan refugees is coming from Punjab and nowhere else. It's not coming from Sindh, it's not coming from Balochistan, it's coming from the army, which is largely Punjabi, and it's, of course, the government, which is that of
So there's this whole crisis that we're talking about is increasing tension in the region, both within Pakistan and externally. Lynne, I wonder if you could just sum up, where does this sit with this global rebalance of powers that we're talking about? We talked about China, Russia, the narcotics trade and the rest of it. Is it an important element here where China, Russia, the US or whatever are sort of positioning themselves, or is it irrelevant?
I don't think that it's irrelevant, but I think it might be a little bit too early. The Chinese presence in Pakistan, as I think Pervez said earlier, is causes a lot of tension, and we see that most specifically in Balochistan, where the local people are totally sidelined from economic activity and development, and the frustration is starting to build. We've had 3 of the major anti-state groups, insurgent groups there, join forces in the last couple of weeks or months, maybe 6 weeks ago, they made that announcement. So they're getting serious about really fighting for a share of what their territory produces. This is a big, potentially important deep water port. There's natural gas there. There's other minerals. It could be a very wealthy place, but the authorities in Pakistan have allowed the Chinese to come in to basically exploit it for their own purposes. And they do that because they need the money that the Chinese are paying the government for access. So I in my belief, we're going to see greater tensions over internal tensions in Pakistan over the failure of the government to develop the economy. As Pervez just said, there is no mandate there. I was there for the election last year. It was an appalling theft. It was comical. And I spent the summer in Karachi last year teaching at a university there. And so I had a lot to do, a lot of contact with local people who they're frustrated, they're angry, but they're also hopeless, to be honest with you. I didn't meet anybody who doesn't want to leave. So I think you asked before about whether or not the Afghans being pushed back into Afghanistan is going to create another wave of probably illegal immigration out of Afghanistan. The appalling incompetence of the Pakistani government is doing the same. So I don't think that this is impacted by the changing global political situation just yet. The American administration, the Trump administration, has started to make some overtures and concessions to the Taliban, but we have to see yet what that means. I think talk about allowing the Taliban to reopen the Afghanistan embassy in DC could be a prelude to deportations of Afghans from America. And things will build up, but I think the frustration and the misery that you already have in Afghanistan and Pakistan is only going to get worse.
Yes. Leno O'Donnell, thank you very much. We're out of time. My conclusion from this, and I think everybody, is that the impact on the Pakistan state is that it will weaken it, and it will in no way strengthen it. It's going to have a negative impact. Thank you, audience, for your questions and comments. Thank you, our panel, Marvin Weinbaum, Pervez Hoodbhoy, Lynne O'Donnell. For the next few months, we are now holding these debates twice a month. And in June and September, we plan to have streamed and in-person Democracy Forum debates at a central London venue. The next stream debate is April the 8th at 2:00 London time, Gaza, War and Radicalization of Muslim Populations in Non-Islamic Countries. those protests and those deportations from America we were talking about are all going to be included. Join us then, but until then, thank you everybody at Democracy Forum. Thank you, panel, and goodbye.
The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organization founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.